In connection with the 60th anniversary of the Point Association, we are undertaking a project of oral interviews with prominent citizens of the Point. And today we are starting with Beth Cullen, who is the current president of the Point Association. She will be retiring from that position later this year, but she's also a longtime resident. Today is July 21st, 2015. My name is John Ward. We're sitting in the library at Harbor House at 111 Washington Street here in the Point section of Newport, Rhode Island. And as I said, Beth Cullen is sitting opposite me. And Beth, how long have you lived here in the Point?
We purchased our house in 1991, so in this fall it'll be 24 years.
Wow. So you're a longtime member, resident. What brought you to the Point?
Ooh, let's see. Well, my family's originally from Newport, so I worked in Newport in the 1980s when I was in college, and my husband's from California, and we were living in Boston, and we were about to buy a house in Charlestown, Mass, and we decided to just look in the Newport market, and we did purchase the house and commuted for 3 years to Boston to our jobs.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's quite...
We were young and crazy.
Yeah.
Bonanza bus every morning.
Well, I hear that from my house.
I was on it. Before iPhones, so there was not a lot of book reading going on.
So now, where do you reside in the Point?
We live at 19 Bayside Avenue, which is on the corner of Sycamore Street, right down by Washington and the bridge, right in the corner there.
Mm-hmm. Now, you said that your family was from Newport. Do you still have relatives here?
Unfortunately, well, it's cousins, but I'm the youngest of the entire line, so most have passed away. Yeah, but my aunt, Jane McManus, was the city clerk in Newport. I think she started in the 50s in City Hall and retired when she was around 68 or 9 in the 90s. So we had a long line of people that had lived here. Since the 1880s, we came in the 1880s from Ireland.
Oh, wow. Tell me what it's been like to be president of the Point Association.
Well, it's been fun. It's been an honor. Being in 60 years of a neighborhood association, it's a lot of responsibility to carry on the work that has been started in the 1950s, but I've enjoyed it very, very much.
You've been in for 5 years now, right?
It'll be 5 years in the fall.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's a lot of responsibility, I agree.
A little story about how I became president. Back in the 90s, after we stopped commuting on the bus to Boston every day, we had a lot of free time on our hands. So my husband and I got involved with the Point Association, and we were involved for about 5 or 6 years. And then life changed. My parents got older. We took care of them, and then we had our son after 16 years of marriage. So for about a decade, we weren't involved. And then about 5 years ago, I got a phone call, and a neighbor said, "Beth, we're looking for a vice president of the Point Association." And I said, "Okay, what do I have to do?" And he said, "Show up for 4 years and then you get to be president." And I thought, oh, okay, well, my son's all set in school. We just redid our kitchen. I have no more excuses. Okay. Within 4 months, the current president of the Point Association moved to, I think, Charleston, South Carolina, or Durham, North Carolina, and I became the president overnight. So it's been interesting.
And didn't the other vice president
We had no other vice presidents. It was
I
me.
thought Peter T.
Peter T. had left. He got married and moved to Breton Cove.
Oh,
so
wow.
It was just me.
Wow.
But it's been fun rebuilding the organization, and I have a great team now.
Right. Well, you've done a terrific job. Tell me, what are some of your favorite memories of the Point?
Oh, well, probably I was very lucky to have been able to know some of what I would call the grand dames of the neighborhood, women who were the founders of our neighborhood association: Eleanor Weaver, Kay O'Brien, Rowan Howard, Sarah Plum, ladies that were just amazing. And they were in their 70s when I met them when I was in my 30s, and I became fast friends with them and learned an awful lot. So they've all now passed on, but I feel as though their spirit is still with me. So this neighborhood has lots of things that I hold dear.
So they were still very active then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's interesting.
Yeah. In the 90s, they were in their 70s, but Kay was still doing the editing of the Green Light. Rowan was also involved heavily in the Green Light. Eleanor Weaver, not as involved. She probably was the eldest, but she did help us a lot.
Well, now, if you've lived here for, what did you say, 24 years?
It'll be
24 years. So what's the biggest changes that you've seen?
Oh, there's a lot of change. When we bought the house in '91, properties were very inexpensive still. Our house was less than $200,000. So in the last 20 years, properties have changed hands. People have passed on, and people have come from elsewhere, and the market values have gone up a lot, an awful lot. When they were at their peak, I would say in 2004, 2004 or 5. Our house was worth $1 million on the books, which was crazy.
Wow.
It's gone back down to a reasonable market value, but it got really crazy for a while with property values.
So when you moved in, was it still? I've only been here about 5 years, and I keep hearing the stories of gentrification, so to speak, of the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Was it still rough around the edges back then, or was it well on its way to?
I think we were just on the cusp. The people that bought our house we bought our house from, had lived in it for about 20 years. It was rough around the edges. In fact, the property that we live on, it was fenced in, and there was a buildable lot included in the yard. We'll say we had a double lot, and it was in the interior was very 70s with shag carpeting and bright pink walls, and the lady collected baby dolls, so there were cases of dolls everywhere. And to be honest, I walked in and I said to the real estate lady, "What else do you have to show us today?" But my father was with us, and the Newporter, who, born and raised here, and my husband, and my father said, "This has good bones," and it did, and he was right. So yes, it was still rough around the edges, but it quickly changed with the economy in the 90s and Bill Clinton, and it really did change, and people did a lot of renovations.
So the 90s is a decisive decade in terms of change?
Yeah, with the economy.
Yeah. So your father, was he born here?
Mm-hmm. Newport Hospital, November 9th, 1919.
Wow.
Yeah.
And he lived here his whole life?
Yeah, well, he lived here through high school. He went to Rogers, class of 39. He was scouted to go to Northwestern University. He was a baseball player with Billy Bull at Cardin's Field. And so he did go to Northwestern 1939, 1940, 41. But then when the war started percolating, World War II, he had two older brothers that were older officers. They had already graduated from college. One was in the Army, one was in the Merchant Marines. He knew he had to go in the service. So he came home, and this was before Pearl Harbor, but things were really brewing. So he took a part-time job. This is a little side story, but interesting for local history. Newport Creamery had not opened as a retail operation yet. They were a creamery, and they got their milk and made things wholesale. And he had always worked for them as a driver, going to the farms in Portsmouth and Middletown, picking up the cream and bringing it back to the dairy, which was on Van Zandt Avenue. But they were going for a retail operation, and they knew he was a good kid and they could trust him. So they sent him to UMass Dartmouth to learn how to do dairy production. In those days, it was a lot of, germ pasteurization, I don't know. So I have a photograph of him somewhere in a white jacket with a class learning how to make ice cream. And he was the first ice cream maker at Newport Creamery in 1941. And I actually met a Newport Creamery historian, probably about 15 years ago, and he said, "Oh, I have all the ledgers handwritten from that first day they were in operation." And he made copies, and I have them, and my father worked 78 hours that week.
Oh, wow.
And for like $2.30 an hour, something crazy like that.
Was that creamery at the corner of Van Zandt and
I don't know where the actual creamery was.
I think it was a Farewell.
Well, the retail operation is where it is today, the one in Middletown.
Right, but I suspect that the creamery was at Farewell in Van Zandt.
Probably.
Where that funny collection of buildings and there's a gas station.
I don't know. I never asked him, but I knew it was on Van Zandt. So he left college, did that, and then the war broke out. He joined the Navy, became a Seabee. He had a heart issue, so he didn't get shipped off to sea. Lucky for him, he became a shopkeeper, was in Davisville, taught sailing. He did, because he was, if anybody could have a good experience, and so many did not during World War II, but he did. And my mother, who was from Johnston, Rhode Island, worked in his office at Davisville, and they met in 1942, and they got married in 1945.
Wow. People are always, well, I should say people, because I'm very curious about the torpedo factory at Rhode Island.
My grandfather worked there. His father, Charles McManus, also born in Newport, born on Washington Street. I think, and I haven't researched this, Store Park had some houses on it, so it could have been in one of those houses, but I do believe it's the house on the corner of Bull House, Marsh, Washington Street that is owned by Joanna Salvo now.
That's a name.
Yes, I think it was owned by Dr. Storer, and he was a Catholic and a pediatrician and a obstetrician, and I think the Irish went to him to have their children. So I think my grandfather was born there. I know it was 35 Washington Street, but I don't know exactly if that was the number. So yeah, 1885 or 1886, he was born in Washington Street.
Wow. I didn't realize that Dr. Storer actually lived in that house.
Or he used it as an office, maybe.
Or an office, maybe.
Yeah. But yeah. And so, so yeah, my grandfather was born there. He was the third in line. His sister Mary and brother John were born in Ireland. Came over with his father worked for the Fall River Line. There were a lot of people that worked as like plumbers and steam fitters and all of that going on with the Fall River Line. So my great grandfather worked there, John McManus, and my grandfather went through school. I think St. Joseph's Church had a high school down where the Jane Pickens Theater is now.
Yes, I think you're right.
Yeah, that's where he went to high school. And he went to high school with J.T. O'Connell.
Oh,
but he didn't get that ambition. But he did very well for himself. All 5 of his children went to college, but J.T. bought Castle Hill. Whole different story. But they were peers, and so it's that generation.
And he worked at the torpedo.
He did. My grandfather did work at the torpedo station. World War I, there was a huge explosion there. My grandfather was burned, and he spent almost a year in the hospital. But survived that. I don't know more about that story, but I know that the story was his second child, George, when he came in the house, he had a beard, and George didn't recognize him, was very upset. I just remember that story. My father was born the next year. My grandfather was one of the 5 founders of People's Credit Union, which came out of the torpedo station.
Oh. Well, how did that go?
They just started a credit union, an employees' bank. That was, they did a lot of that in those days.
Oh,
Wow. What's the movie, the Christmas movie, It's a Wonderful Life?
Oh,
That kind of small housing and loan sort of thing.
Right.
That People's was started in the torpedo station as a credit union for the employees.
How many people worked out there? Do you know? Do you have any idea?
Thousands. And this is just, a little personal thing. My husband and I have been working on a STEAM charter school, as you know, for the last 2.5 years. And my father went to Rogers, which is now Thompson Middle School. So on Broadway, the building that is Thompson Middle School, half of it is new. We rebuilt that in 2002. But the other half is the original building. And if you look at it, it says Townsend Industrial School. There's a placard over the door. Townsend Industrial School was for kids like Voctech, and they taught drafting, industrial drafting. And my father had a knack for that. He was very artistic. So he studied industrial drafting in high school in preparation for a job at the torpedo station. So the founders and fathers of Newport were smart enough to know that we need to train our children for jobs that we have here. Unfortunately, that is no longer the case. And in fact, I was just writing today, we have Electric Boat, General Dynamics, all these companies at Quonset Point right in our front yard, and they cannot find skilled workers because we have fallen short in our educational system in preparing children to work in those skilled jobs. And not necessarily engineers, but every laborer. They have to know basic math, and we just aren't getting kids to do that. So a little plug for my STEAM initiative.
So was the torpedo factory run by the Navy then, or was that an outside company that was running it? Do you know?
I'm not an expert on that. You'd have to look that up. But I know, the torpedo factory, the torpedo station they called it, is a precursor to Newark. So what we have now, the Naval Undersea Warfare Center, or whatever that stands for, is the torpedo station, but now it's much larger and much more high-tech. But that's what it was. And Goat Island became empty after, I think the 50s it closed, right after World War II. So that's a whole other interesting story to find out about the Roos family who bought Goat Island and built the hotel and built the marina and built the condominiums. That's a whole other chapter of history that I don't know about, but would be interesting.
Is that Roos like they did development down around Washington and stuff?
Tom Roos, not Peter Roos.
R-O-U-S-E?
I don't know, you have to look it up, but yeah, that's a whole other story.
Wow.
Roger was his uncle, and he bought the property from the government cheap.
So I'm kind of curious. So thousands of people worked at the torpedo factory, and so they all would troop through the point to ferries at Store Park.
And I met a man who was married to my neighbor, Ray. I'll have to think of Ray's last name. I should. He was born here on the point. I can't think of his last name. He passed away of cancer, but he was a neighbor. And as a child, he would deliver the newspapers out to the torpedo station on the ferry.
Wow.
Yeah, so I firsthand his last name. It's awful. He was married to Carol Pardee, who is still my name.
Well,
Havican, Havican, Ray Havican.
Right.
Great guy. Yeah.
And so picturing all these people coming down Bridge Street every morning to get on the ferries.
Yeah.
But then did a lot of people in the Point neighborhood itself work there? Or was...
As far as I know. My family didn't live on the Point, so I don't have a lot of first-hand Point stories. They were North End Irish, so they lived first on Channing Place and then on Elliott Place. They bought a big house in 1939 on Elliott Place. But my father learned to swim as a kid at the Van Zandt Pier, and this was his playground. I mean, they all hung out here.
Right, right. What effect do you think the bridge had on the neighborhood?
Oh, there's a lot written, and I'm sure the History and Archives Department has a lot of articles about that. What effect did it have? Well, luckily not the effect that it was supposed to have. When they were building the bridge, the Point Association, as far as I know from this little bit of research that I've done, they really fought hard to get it to go where it is today. They were thinking about bringing it a little further south. They were thinking about putting a pretty, like an America's Cup type road where Washington Street is now, connector, circulate or something. Dave Bethune fought it, where we're sitting right now, and that's another chapter that we have to talk about is Ade for another day. She had a lot to do with preserving the charm of this neighborhood.
Really? Because I knew she was involved with Harbor House, but she was involved beyond the Harbor House situation.
Oh, very much so. She started fighting for our neighborhood, I think, in the 60s. Yeah.
Wow. Just to reclaim it, so to speak.
Her father, as far as I know, and this is secondhand, I think I read this, her father came to Newport as was she Belgian? From Belgium?
Belgium, I think.
Chemist, and worked at the torpedo station. That's how they got here.
Oh.
Another great story. One day in the 90s, maybe 96, I was home, no longer working in Boston. I was cooking for something, and my doorbell rang, and I went to the door, and it was a middle-aged couple, and I thought they were Jehovah's Witnesses, and I wasn't being very nice because I had stuff in the kitchen. I was cooking, I had dust on my flour on my face, and they had British accents, and they said, "Oh, please, we believe my mum was born here." And I went, oh, okay, all right. But then I said, what was the name? They're still on my doorstep. I wasn't being very hospitable, but they said the name, and then they whipped out the birth certificate. And it said 19 Bayside Avenue, and I said, well, come in. So they came in. Long story short, my third floor was used as a rental during, what year was it? Probably, I can't remember the dates now. I should know the dates. 20s, I guess. And the third floor was an apartment that this lady was born in, the mother of the person who was on my doorstep from England. So British officer's child. A British officer was renting our third floor.
Wow.
When we bought the house, it had the dolls, it had the pink walls, and it had the rust shag carpet, but it also had locks on. It had 8 bedrooms, and there were locks on every one of the bedroom doors because it was used as a rooming house because we were so close to the base.
But a lot of houses in the Point, I think, were used that way.
Yeah.
Mine was.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much for speaking with us.
That's
Sure.
chapter 1. We can always do chapter 2.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.